Welcome to our time together. Sometimes it's easier to follow God in dramatic ways than it is in the simple things. Perhaps we're looking for something spectacular that will take our breath away. Sometimes that happens, but more often than not, God's call in our lives can seem pretty lackluster. It's similar to a question I ask a prospective husband during my premarital classes. I'll ask him, "Would you lay down your life for your wife to be?" And invariably they'll say, "Well, of course I would." And I say, "I'm not talking about taking a bullet for her or getting in front of a runaway train to save her. I'm talking about the much harder ways to lay down your life for your spouse. After a long day at work and you're both relaxing on the couch, somebody has to get up whenever the doorbell rings. In the middle of the night, when the baby wakes up, you're the one who gets up to take care of it so she can sleep. Suddenly, laying down your life for your spouse doesn't seem as glamorous, but it's a lot harder." We encounter something similar to this in the story of Naaman, which we find in 2 Kings chapter 5. I mentioned Naaman in my sermon last week as an example of someone who thought he knew what God expected of him. And he had to be convinced to do something much more mundane and humdrum because that's what God actually wanted. Naaman was the commander of a foreign army, and he had leprosy, a disfiguring disease that would turn you into a social pariah. Now, Naaman learned about Elisha, the great prophet in Israel, and thought, well, maybe he can help me. So he gathered up all sorts of riches to give to the prophet in order to be healed. Naaman arrived with great fanfare at the house of the prophet, and I imagine he made quite the scene. And what did Elisha do? Nothing. He didn't even go outside to greet his distinguished guest. He simply sent out a messenger with simple instructions. Go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River. Naaman was outraged. He expected to be told to accomplish some great task, not just take a bath in a dirty little river that wasn't nearly as nice as the rivers he had back home in his own country. I suspect Naaman was also angry because his pride was hurt. Elisha didn't make a fuss over him. He didn't even think it was worth his while to go to his door to greet this great general. Now, fortunately for Naaman, one of his servants was a bit more clear-headed. And so he said, "Sir, if you would have been willing to do some great thing that the prophet asked of you, why not give this simple little task a try?" So Naaman took his servant's advice and went to the river and washed himself just as Elisha had told him, and sure enough, he was healed. Naaman was so happy, he went back to Elisha's house to shower lavish gifts upon him. But Elisha refused. He asked for neither great deed nor generous payment. Now, the story goes on, but this is the part I'd like us to look at today. Maybe it's time to ask yourself, when are you like Naaman? I'm not talking about having some terrible disease or being a general, but when are you eager to go on some noble quest to serve God, to make great sacrifices for Him? And those opportunities are out there. For example, I have a friend whose nephew is in a ministry that intentionally goes to war zones to provide medical care. That's a pretty heroic way to serve God. But I suspect for every person whom God calls to serve, like my friend's nephew, there's more than 100 where God asks for simple, everyday acts of mercy, love, and justice. There's more than 100 ways in which the enemy to face is not some great evil out there, but the struggle against the sin we wage in our own hearts. For every person God calls to be martyred, more than 100 are called to wipe kids' dirty noses, to check on an elderly neighbor, to give a kind word to a stranger. Like a newlywed husband, you might discover that laying down your life isn't as dramatic and flashy as you think, but it's harder. Like Naaman, we learn what God requires may be so simple we don't think it's worth the effort, but it can make all the difference in the world when it's part of God's plan. We live out our faith in the little things, the everyday choices we make, the everyday interactions we have. So yes, be willing to lay down your life for your faith if you're called upon to do so, but also be willing to be a Sunday school teacher or a driver for Meals on Wheels, because this is where true obedience and discipleship lives. Would you pray with me, please? Lord, forgive our vanity, which will lead us to think that we must serve you in great heroic ways and that that's all that really matters, that we matter only if we do great deeds in your name. Teach us instead the lesson of Naaman, that instead of going on some great quest, all we have to do is go wash in the river. Instead of giving lavish gifts, all we have to do is pledge our loyalty to you, Lord. So open us, Lord, to the simple, everyday ways in which we can serve and honor and obey you, instead of just holding out for the big flashy things that we think will matter more. In all ways, though, Lord, help us to listen to your voice so we may heed your call for us. Amen. Thanks for joining me. We'll talk again later.